This conference will now be recorded.
Let's see, next meeting tentatively is the 15th November, and then December 13th, I think, the next 2 dates. Are we live now? Yes.
So welcome to Greening USA's session today. I just wanted to let people on the webinar know that if you have questions, please type your questions in the chat box and we will get to you towards the close of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. And again, welcome to everyone. My name is John Presbiora. I'll just take a few minutes for announcements and then we'll get to our panel discussion today. It's such a nice day. Maybe some people are struggling to find their way to the Center of Excellence. We had a pretty good sign up, and I think it's a pretty good turnout so far. But there might be a few other people that come in. Today's presentation started off with 4 speakers. But we're down to 3 because Jason let us know that he wasn't able to be here today. So if you're expecting Jason Evans, we're gonna reschedule Jason for another time. So I think we might get 3 perspectives, but it was billed as 2, and we might just get 1, which is fine. Is the Syracuse suburbs for the grid. So we're going to hear what that's all about today. Usually before we start, we like to go around the room and just have an opportunity for everyone to quickly introduce themselves, maybe say their affiliation if they want to add that, but otherwise that's not necessary. Like to minimize any speeches or announcements. So why don't we start over here and go around the room?
Greg Lewis.
You're next, Carol.
Carol Biesmeyer, Greening USA member.
I'm Sean Tyrell.
Thanks, Sean.
I'm Ashley Kang. I run the Stand newspaper.
Bob Chrysler, Greening USA member.
Sue Holter. Audrey Fletcher.
David Coburn. John Miranda.
Alan
Peter King. Brett Kupperman.
Melanie Neal, I'm a member.
Sure, Ken.
Ken Bovis, a longtime member. Bob Haley. I've worked with many groups working on I-81 for about 7 years now. In terms of AIA and as a task force on I-81. Also Moving People Transportation Coalition, which is a wonderful group that's come out of ACTS, Alliance for Communities Transforming Syracuse. Good thing about the Moving People Transportation Coalition is looking at the total need of transportation and advocating for the best for our residents for living and working, and seeing how that ties into the demands for this major transformation of I-81.
Thanks, Bob.
And I'm Dave Ashley, and Meredith, partner of Ashley McGraw Architects. And right now I'm working on a white paper on the future transportation system for Central New York. And anybody has any ideas they want to contribute, why come to me.
Well, I'm Coran Klaver. I'm just a community member. I'm a DeWitt resident. I teach at Syracuse University.
And I'll announce you a little bit more, but fine. And then you'll have a chance to tell us all about all the things that you're involved with. And then we have Kerin. Yeah, then we have Kerin and Silvia here. And then, of course, Diane Brantley.
Diane Brantley, I'm the president of the USA. I just very quickly wanted to thank the Syracuse Center of Excellence for allowing us to continue using this beautiful facility with technology available to us, and we are recording this. This will show up on our YouTube channel. If you have friends that would like to hear what was said today, please ask them to go to YouTube and just Google Greening USA, and our channel will pop up. This is an all-volunteer organization. None of us make a penny off of what we do. If you feel like you're bringing value to our community, please, I invite you to become a member. We have membership right next to the membership forms is a sign-up sheet for our electronic newsletter that we send out every couple of weeks. And we promote the events of local like-minded organizations in that newsletter. So lots of events that are similar to this. It's free. There's no obligation to sign up for it. We don't share our mailing list. And restrooms are down the hall in front of the glass doors at turn left. Did I get anything?
I think so, Diane. Thank you very much. I'll just add that David Ashley and Ken Bovis are former, I guess we could say, emeritus members of the Greening USA Board of Directors. So we thank you for your assistance to Greening USA over the years and for being here today with us. So in continuing our discussion on I-81 issues, we heard from Kerin Rigney, who said we'd like an opportunity to talk about the Syracuse suburbs for the grid. And we said that would be fantastic. And she went to work and found a terrific panel so that we have 3 speakers today. You heard Coran Klaver introduced herself. She's an associate professor of English literature at Syracuse University. She has lived in the town of DeWitt for 8 years. She's lived in the Syracuse area for over 20 years. She has focused her concerns around issues of racial justice and equity in the city of Syracuse. And the suburbs. She's been active in the Syracuse Police Accountability and Reform Coalition, the ACTS, the Alliance for Communities Transforming Syracuse, the community and the Youth Community Violence and Youth Task Force, and she's currently active in leadership roles with Alternatives to Violence Project, OGs Against Violence, Voice, and of course the Syracuse Suburbs for the Grid. Also, we will have Silvia Macor, who is Sylvia's a retired librarian from the Syracuse City School District and the Onondaga County system. She'll always be a librarian and educator, and she holds a master's degree in library science and in journalism from the Newhouse School of Public Communications. And Silvia is a member of Uplift Syracuse, and that advocates locally on behalf of progressive and social justice issues. So our leader of this esteemed panel today is Kerin Rigney, and Kerin's a DeWitt town councilor. Probably most of you know her. She wears a lot of hats in the town of DeWitt. I don't know how she has time to do anything else, but she's a chair of the DeWitt Police Commission, the chair of Comprehensive Planning Commission. She's a liaison with DeWitt Advisory Conservation Commission, and a member of the Syracuse I-81 Cooperative, and also a member of Uplift Syracuse. Kerin was instrumental in getting an update to the town's comprehensive plan done. She has traveled around the world, has vast experience and a very deep concern for the role of infrastructure and how it affects everyone's lives. So I'm going to turn the panel over to Kerin, and take it away, Kerin.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. How are you? So first, I want to thank Greening USA for giving us this opportunity to address everyone on this very important topic. And I'd also like to thank Coran and Silvia, who are really community champions. And they have actually been instrumental in educating residents of the suburban areas and encouraging them to use their voice in this topic of I-81. So I'm not here today to persuade anyone of one way or another of what build you think is best. I'm really here to talk about why we are working to involve the residents of the suburbs about this important discussion. The Save 81 group has worked to discredit the Department of Transportation and has engaged in a misinformation campaign with the goal of convincing the governor that they represent a consensus in our county. Nothing could be further from the truth. Being that the tunnel or so-called hybrid option were clearly inferior, I had serious doubts that everybody in the suburban areas were going along with that. I also know that some haphazard surveys were being conducted and push polls, but I also know that none of them were done in a way that would produce legitimate results. Consequently, I have joined with Coran and Silvia in the Syracuse Suburbs for the Community Grid group to disprove that Save 81 is speaking on authority of a consensus. So I'm kind of the political part of it. And they're going to talk to you about the rest of the work we're doing. So many years ago, when I was a college student, I remember reading a little quote on the side of a tea box. And it was from the poem For Whom the Bell Tolls by John Donne. And it said, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." And this phrase made a huge impression on me. And actually, I've carried it with me throughout my life. I believe this is a truth that we need to consider when we are governing. We are all Americans. We're all Central New Yorkers. We're all residents of Onondaga County. When we try to govern by chopping up each quadrant and maintain a us versus them mentality, then we will all lose. In regards to the I-81, the goal of our entire county should be to seek a win-win solution for the reconstruction. So nobody affected by the change should be left out of the planning. That being said, it has never been logical nor fair to give equal weight of the decision to both the city and the surrounding suburbs. By far, the most affected area of the I-81 project is the city. The design should be weighted more heavily by those residents. But this is not a zero-sum game. This doesn't mean that if the city's preferences are heard, then the suburbs are ignored. Mayor Walsh and the city are dedicated to work in conjunction with the surrounding suburban areas to find the best ways to adjust to any serious issues that the new redesign may cause. As a suburban leader, I appreciate this and I will take advantage of it. This is the way to work towards a win-win. So how did I become interested in this? Well, after I was elected to the DeWitt Town Board in 2014, I was asked to chair our town's comprehensive planning commission. And although I led a group of professional planners, municipal lawyers, business people, and architects, I needed to learn more about planning and infrastructure. So I studied, I researched, I spoke to professionals, I attended planning symposiums. But my understanding doesn't just come from theoretical models. I have had the privilege to live in a variety of places, and I have seen firsthand the types of infrastructures and many types of infrastructures and the effects that they have on their society. My biggest lesson in all of this was the effect good or poor planning can have on the daily lives of people, the economy, and social justice. I have also learned a great deal about the role planning has played in institutionalizing racism. Our painful poverty in the south side of Syracuse was planned by our predecessors through a combination of redlining, building a highway through a thriving community, and restrictive zoning in the suburbs. But this is not a past problem. A few weeks ago, the newspapers reported the 17th murder in Syracuse just this year. This is outrageous. But for decades, Syracuse has not figured out how to undo the damning decisions of the past and move into a more prosperous future for all. I know that the I-81 project, if done right, can have a significant effect on changing the course of this generational poverty that we should all care about. It is a stain on our entire county. The I-81 project should never have become political. In fact, if the process had simply been followed, then the construction probably would be taking place right now. As an elected official, I never wanted to be in the position of having to fight to have the process respected. Unfortunately, as the Post-Standard recently reported, one developer, Destiny, is responsible for funding the Save 81 group after concealing their identity for years. Destiny laments in this article that the grid option means fewer visitors to the mall, which kind of makes their motives a little clear. Their misinformation campaign has confused and frightened the public and pitted the suburban leaders against the city. They have intentionally sown distrust in the findings of the Department of Transportation in order to safeguard their own interests, regardless of the consequences to the people of Onondaga County. But this decision is incredibly critical to the viability of this region for generations to come. We can't get it wrong. And we simply cannot allow one developer to derail what is best in the long run for our children and grandchildren. My wish is that all the suburban leaders will join in working with the mayor in good faith of Syracuse, in good faith, to start building a brighter future for the entire county. And so I have joined with Coran and Silvia to encourage suburban residents to counter the false narrative put out by those whose intentions are not beneficial to all of us. So no man is an island. We have to think of this county as one in order to do the best for all. Thank you very much.
So I'm okay. So I'm going to start with the presumption that the community grid is the best option for the city and is identified as a city by the city as such. So that's just the presumption here. And so you can kind of, all the arguments you've heard about why the community grid is for the city, that is built into everything I'm saying. My argument will be that because of the suburbs' dependence on and interconnection with the city, the community grid is also the best option for the suburbs. Not really a big, it's on this plan. Oh, so this clicker, sorry. Here. Just click, which one? Sorry. Slideshow. Let me escape it for a second. It's not, yes, one up.
We had it working.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So how would we? Okay, we can just skip that. I'll just talk. Okay, so the suburbs depend. So the suburbs depend upon a vital urban core. Our main regional economic engines are the meds and eds, and they are in the city. These provide professional employment for residents of the suburbs, and thus the tax base, much of the residential tax base for the suburbs. The city also provides the culture for the region. It provides, oh, perfect, you got it. Okay. There we go. It provides professional employment for suburban residents as well as supporting the residential tax base of the city. That's what I said. Arts and culture. My concern is that the decline of the urban core will also threaten our regional well-being. We know that the city has a weak municipal tax base due to the long-term effect of redlining and white flight. This leads to inadequate funds to maintain infrastructure and high-quality public schools. Results in crumbling infrastructure are where the city has water main breaks, potholes in roads, bridges. These are infrastructures that both the businesses that employ us rely on, and that we who commute from the suburbs into the city, the infrastructure we depend on, especially the roads, to get to our places of employment. Even if we're coming from the suburbs, we still depend on those city roads. Leads to an underfunded public school system. I'll return to that in a second. In addition to lack of municipal funds, the condition of concentrated poverty in the city also has other negative effects on regional well-being. Poverty, crime, lack of economic development, and mobility are drags upon the urban environment, counterbalancing and straining against movements towards urban revitalization. So even as we put money into urban revitalization, we continue to have these pockets of concentrated poverty that kind of pull down. It's like we're pulling down the curve. It's this constant tension. It also makes the city unattractive to a highly qualified workforce and businesses seeking such a highly qualified workforce. Finally, it seems to me, and this is personal opinion, but my sense, it seems to me that the persistence of concentrated poverty creates a cognitive and moral dissonance between suburban well-being and urban immiseration for many with liberal political and social values, particularly younger millennials and Gen Z, who are increasingly aware of the conditions of the city and have to deal with the contradictions between well-being in the city and immiseration in the suburbs. The next part of my one thing I want to talk about is the challenge of keeping our cities, our children in central New York. Increasingly, our children want to be able to have the option to live in the city as well as the suburbs. So this is one of the reasons. So while my generation may still want to live in the suburbs, if we want our kids to stay here and return to CNY, to central New York after college, we have to provide them options for where they want to live. We need a tax base and an integrated population that can create stronger public schools. We need to encourage a strong urban core that will be attractive to the next generation. Finally, many millennials and Generation Zs prefer not to drive or rely on personal vehicles for transportation, both for reasons of personal preference and because of concerns about climate change. This is an article from NPR. Generation Z may not want to own cars. Can automakers lose them? So future of transportation in cities. Transportation for the next 30 years will be transformed in ways we can't imagine by self-driving car technology, the threat of climate change, and the new urbanist movements. This is not my area of expertise, but I see it as a known unknown. So it does not make sense to design a new 81, i.e. the viaduct, around an old transportation patterns. There's a national movement toward, greater walkability and bikeability in cities. These movements not only to appeal to younger generations' desires for their own living needs, but they also have the potential to lower transportation and economic barriers for the city's poor, who depend on bicycling because they do not have access to cars. And it will also increase public education, public transportation. This will in turn appeal to ethical commitments of millennials and Gen Zs. And for those of you who drive around, I encourage you next time you drive around and drive by bus stops, notice who's at those bus stops, right? The people at those bus stops are primarily African American. That is an effect of redlining and systemic racism that continues today. You can see it in who's riding the bus and who cannot afford to have a personal vehicle, right? That's because of the racial wealth gap and things like that. So just look who's riding the bus. And so if we increase transportation for public transportation, bikeability, walkability, that's going to help us and my children, my grandchildren, but it's also going to help the poor. And increase their economic opportunities. Connecting the cities to the suburbs will keep both vital and make the suburbs more appealing. Finally, public transportation are also increasingly attractive to senior citizens who do not want to have to drive to remain socially active and engaged. So the more we can increase those, we increase the well-being of our senior citizens who I will be in a few years. Finally, the Elevating Erie project is that the community of DeWitt has put together is a vision for connecting the Erie Canal, right? So imagine you're connecting the Erie Canal, you're biking down, and then you get to the 81, right? By rebuilding the viaduct, it's just like this kind of structural contradiction between what the Elevating Erie is saying they want to accomplish and what is actually, and what they're doing by advocating for the viaduct rather than the community grid. So I think that's kind of all I have. And with that, I will turn it over to Silvia, who's going to talk about the process that has been going on and the delays in this process.
Yahoo! Take it away.
All right, and this is to go forward, let's go backward. Right? So good afternoon, I'm Silvia Macor. I'm also a resident of DeWitt. I've lived in DeWitt for 20 years. Former educator, of course, former educator, I passed out handouts. Teacher, you haven't gotten a handout? Kerin, could give you one. Okay. My role in this presentation is to go through very briefly. Oh, they can hear me now? No? Okay. Oh, sorry. All right. Give me a, and what? It's okay. Yeah, so my role is to kind of go through what the New York State Department of Transportation has done so far to ensure that that this process has been followed thoroughly and fairly. As you will see, they certainly have done their due diligence along the way. And as my co-presenters, Kerin and Coran, have indicated, they have been working at this for a long time and have met certain have obstacles have thrown at them through the process that they've had to work through, because this process has turned political, and it shouldn't have been, but it has. So basically, the saga of the DOT and its involvement in creating a solution to the I-81 viaduct is started, well, as you can see, in 1944, the Federal Highway Act was passed, and of course, as part of the FDR's New Deal, tons of highways were built throughout the country, and that was the beginning of the car era. Everybody would, oh, let's get in the car, let's drive. And in 1958, Coran and, as Kerin have indicated, the decision was made to place the highway where it is now along Almond Street. And it displaced a whole neighborhood, and it created all kinds of issues for the city. And one of the worst ones is pockets of poverty. So in 2008, that's really when the New York State Department of Transportation decided to reevaluate I-81 and its current conditions. That was 50 years ago, and more than 50 years ago, and it began with something called the I-81 Corridor Study. And they looked at the conditions. We have extreme weather in Syracuse, and they looked at the condition of the highway. And if you recall, at that time, the whole country was experiencing infrastructure issues with highways falling down and so on. So they looked at it and decided that it merited to have structural changes. So that led to the I-81 Challenge Study, and that was created to help inform the New York State Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Authority to how best to proceed. And that was 3 years. ultimately, the decision as to what happens to I-81 resides with the Federal Highway Authority. They'll put out a decision that will decide what happens to I-81. So going forward, I'll move on to the next slide. So in August 2013, the New York State Department of Transportation began an environmental review of the process. And that was called a notice of intent, and it was recorded in the Federal Register. The purpose of the notice of intent was to explain the roles of the Federal Highway Authority and the New York State Department of Transportation. So that was basically signaling we're going to do something about this and we're going to look into it. Between September 2013 and April 2015, there was a scoping phase. That was the phase of public engagement. I'd like to highlight the public engagement. The New York State Department of Transportation has held, I can't tell you how many public hearings, how many open houses. They've really gone out of their way and beyond to engage the community and listen to all kinds of stakeholders involved in I-81 project, suburbs, city, and so the scoping phase of the public engagement began with 5 neighborhood meetings held from September 25th, 2013 through October 30th. And there was a scoping hearing held on November 13th at the On Center, okay? And a draft scoping report was released in 2014. After that, there was the New York State Department held an open house. There was a final scoping report issued, and there was an open house with a presentation. And I don't know if anybody has ever gone downtown, the old Carnegie Library. Okay, they had all those boards up. I actually stopped by one day and went through and looked at all the boards of all the different designs and alternatives. They had an open house and invited people to look at all the designs and all the alternatives. There were 7 neighborhood meetings held from July 16th to the 31st. They accepted public comments through September 2nd, and so on. So with the scoping phase and the presentation and display boards, we come to the present. So in January 2017 and April 2019, that is up to today, the Department of Transportation issued sort of like a draft, a preview of a, no, wait, I'm sorry, I'm going ahead of myself. No, at that time, there was actually, what happened was that local politicians asked the governor to look into a tunnel option. And that was, so the governor said, okay, I've been told that the tunnel, we haven't looked at the tunnel option, we need to re-examine that. And that's what happened. So the Department of Transportation looked at a tunnel option to replace the viaduct. And they looked at several options and decided that it was not viable for several reasons, including cost, structural issues, and environmental issues. So now we come to the present. So April of this year, there was, because there were so many political issues going on and so much misinformation, the New York State Department of Transportation decided to kind of release a draft design report, a pre-draft environmental impact statement. And this preliminary report comes out and selects the community grid as the best option to replace the viaduct. And up to now, the DOT had an open house, I believe, at the On Center. And they've had 10 community meetings and those community meetings are still going on as we speak. And it was during one of these community meetings that the folks in the town of Salina spoke very vocally how they were going to be impacted economically by the community grid. So the DOT listened to them and said, okay, we will try to study what the economic impact is going to be on your end. And right now we have no deadline projected as to when this economic impact study is going to happen. So now, where are we now? We have a kind of a preliminary draft environmental impact statement, and the DOT is looking at the economic impact to Salina. They've said that the tunnel is not an option. We're looking right now to the second quarter of 2020 as the time where the DOT will release a final draft environmental impact statement. Okay, and after that is released, there are going to be 45 days for the public to comment. After 45 days, the DOT has to answer to every comment that's made, address them, all those comments. Once that's done, there's going to be a final environmental impact study or FEIS report, and after 30 days from the submission of the FEIS, the Federal Highway Authority, not administration, prepares a record of decision or ROD, defining the preferred alternative and why it was chosen. And then, of course, they will release funds to get the project going. And from what I understand, am I correct? It's $2 billion plus dollars? Correct. So you can see from this that the Department of Transportation has certainly done its due diligence. It's had addressed all kinds of concerns. It's had meetings, hearings, open houses, designs, and it finally chose the community grid. And we think, Suburbs for the Grid, think that it's important to support the decision of the DOT and move forward with this project. And enough of these delays and obstruction of a project that's really important to our area and significant, considering that we are driving on a highway that's pretty old. And if you look underneath all those, the bridge, the viaduct, it's pretty rusty. And you know, I sometimes wonder, like, oh, okay. So my last takeaway is it's been a long, strange trip for the New York State Department of Transportation. And so how can you support the community grid? How can you support the DOT? We have a Syracuse Suburbs for the Grid Facebook page. You can write letters to the editor. If you do contact the New York State Department of Transportation, please let us know. There is a compendium of support that the DOT needs to prove that there's all these people in the suburbs that support the grid. So if you write a letter to the editor, send us an email. Here's our email. We have cards out in the lobby. If you send cards to your elected officials, send us an email so we know how to keep track of them, and send us a message message through Facebook. We have petitions out in the lobby. If you get petitions going, let us know and bring them to us. And you can also organize meetings at your house, informational meetups, and either one of us will try to come or we'll have somebody else come and support you, or if nobody can come, we can give you the information. And finally, we need to get this project on the road and get going. And thank you.
So now we're going to open it up for questions, but first I want to say thank you for the great presentation. And I'm going to assert the chair's privilege to ask the first question. And what really, is striking about your presentation is the politics of it. And so I would like to know a little bit more about the organization, how much depth it has, where it exists, how many, people, and more, a little bit about that, the movement that you got. And maybe it's the three of you, which is fine. But I want to know then how, you're going out and trying to expand it. But a related question is when Coran mentioned about the Elevating Erie project, it sort of said, it sounded like she was poking somebody about that project, because here we got Elevating Erie, which is a town at DeWitt project, right? And against the grid, and I guess there's some politics I would presume, within DeWitt about supporting the grid versus, supporting the viaduct or tunnel, right? I'm not sure of all that. So I would like to, I think those are kind of rolled in questions, the politics there, particularly then into DeWitt, which you all kind of represent. Maybe you can give us a little bit of glimpse inside of that.
We started literally as a Facebook group. I just wanted to make, in the face of Save 81, I created a Facebook group to start to try to make supporters of the community grid who are in the suburbs more visible to each other, and to give us a chance to organize. So that since then we have started to meet in person, and we're just kind of an ad hoc group. We meet, we've created town halls and organizing meetings as we see fit. So we've gotten more organized just as need be. And I was poking at DeWitt because I feel like that the Elevating Erie project is a really progressive, visionary project of connection, right? And the leaders of the town of DeWitt, with the exception of my representative, Kerin Rigney, are adamantly against the community grid. And I just see that as a contradiction.
Thank you. Well, I really didn't want to get involved in this. When I first got on the town board, I was told that I should support the Save 81, and I didn't agree. I first want to say that I am first and foremost a representative of the people of DeWitt. I care about their concerns, what happens to them. I also have a great deal of respect for my colleagues on the board and our town supervisor. We just don't agree on this point. And they feel very strong about it. They've done many press conferences. And I didn't feel that I needed to be quiet about it, because I really don't agree. And frankly, I was a little concerned because they repeated many times the same thing, that everybody in the suburb agree with them. Well, I knew that wasn't the case. And I didn't see any kind of evidence to support that. I felt that it was, and by them saying that, and by them going continually in front of cameras and trying to make the case that this would be a catastrophe for the county, I just felt that a narrative was being pushed out there that just wasn't true. It just wasn't even balanced or fair. And I felt it was very important that I put other information out there so that people could get the whole picture and not just the one that was slanted. Now, there are some people in DeWitt who don't want the community grid. But what we have learned in our process of working with people in the suburbs is that a lot of people don't really know all the details. They don't really know exactly what the Department of Transportation actually came up with after all of their studies. So I think that it's really important. I'm a fact-based person, okay? And I really think it's important to put aside your personal feelings or the pressure to do one thing or another. Look at the facts and look at what you know about the people and the region and the history. And I think that that's the way you should be looking at making decisions. So that's.
Thank you. So I got involved because well, Coran started the Facebook page Suburbs for the Grid, and I was looking at it, and I was already in favor of the community grid. Honestly, always thought it was the best option personally. Even before I delved into it and looked at the studies and so on. I was born in Italy, and I'm used to cities. I've traveled all over, and I'm used to cities that have open spaces, walkable spaces, and I could never dream of having like a viaduct in the middle of the center of a city. So that was always my perception. So when Coran put out a message on Facebook that said, we need to stand up for the grid in the suburbs, and we need to organize so that our leaders, our local leaders know that this is not a fait accompli, that everybody agrees that the rebuild of I-81 is the right way. There's tons of us who want the community grid. So I contacted Coran. I said, let's have a meeting. So we had a meeting, I think it was in January, at the Unitarian Church. And we had a great turnout. A lot of people came, signed up to begin the process of letting our local leaders know that the suburbs were not on board with rebuilding I-81, saving I-81. We wanted a community grid. After that, there were the CACO town halls, and kind of like there was a lull, not much going on. And then all of a sudden, we started seeing all these billboards go up, Save 81, and all this disinformation coming out, reading about lobbyists going down to Washington to lobby to save I-81. So we said, no, we need to ramp up again. So we started having more community meetings and having people from the suburbs come to our meetings to see how we can support the DOT and move forward with this project. So this is where I'm at right now. This shouldn't be a political process. We have a Department of Transportation. They have done their due diligence. It's based on facts. Their findings are based on facts, and we should support them and move ahead. And we're at the point right now where we need to, we don't think that, okay, this is the community grid, it's where it's at, so you have to live with it. No, we can have meetings and figure out ways to make the community grid work for everyone. We can have sound barriers put up along 481, better signage for people who own hotels in Salina. There's so many things we can do to make the community grid work for everybody. And yes, some people are not going to be 100% happy with it, but it can work for all of us and make our city the vital community that we need, really. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Can you explain what the main reasons the Town of DeWitt supervisor, for example, gives for opposing the grid? And how do you counter argue those reasons? And also, do you think there's a reason that's not being stated? Thank you.
Well, that's the question of the day. And subpoena. So it's a great question. I'm actually so incredibly impressed with our town supervisor and all the things that he's done in our town. We are just we're probably most progressive town in the whole county. And he's actually the reason I ran for town board, because I saw all the incredible things he was doing. And so when it came to this, It was a screeching halt. Wait, what? It didn't really make sense to me. He has said for a long time that if we concede, then we've lost and we don't have any leverage to ask for things for the town when the I-81 comes in. You can say that, but at the end of the day, when you keep pushing really hard to stop it, then that doesn't really make sense to me. So he's come up with lots of little reasons. You know, he's a scientist, and he's come up with ideas of why, you know, the DOT's findings weren't accurate and they're not taking into consideration this, that, the other. I mean, he has, you know, he's very good at talking about these things. Unfortunately, recently I was talking to one of the town residents, and she was telling me that she had talked to him and he convinced her that the community grid would be a terrible thing for the town. And so I kind of questioned, you know, back and forth with her, and she started coming up with numbers. And these numbers seemed like really outrageous, and about like how much traffic's going to flood into the city, and you know how it's going to be a disaster and nobody's going to be able to move. And I said, where did you get these numbers? And she said, well, I just Googled it. Well, if anybody in this room Googles like what numbers on about I-81, guess what website they're going to take you right to? The Save 81 one, okay? And sadly, a lot of the information that they have on there is just not accurate. It is just not accurate. So, you know, he can talk to people, and but it's not just him, right? It's not just him, but he, you know, he's held steadfast with that. So I wish I can.
I want to make one point about listening to my town supervisor talk about this project. And one thing that made me very angry was that he speaks for the city. He says that he knows best what's good for the city. The city. The Syracuse city. He's talked about his relationship with Southside residents and how he knows better actually what's better for the city, and that this will not be good for the city. And I think that is so arrogant for someone in DeWitt to claim to be speaking for the interests of the city when the city has spoken very clearly what it wants.
As far as I'm concerned, I wrote a letter to our town supervisor and never got an answer. I wrote a letter questioning why he was not supporting the community grid, since our town is so progressive. If you go to the town of DeWitt, you'll see they have a charging station for electric cars. Town invested a lot of money in a solar panel farm, and I never received an answer. So I can't say why, as far as I'm concerned, why he doesn't support the community grid.
Related questions, if I could. A follow-up question just to your points, and they could be just very accurate yes/no answers. Does elevating Erie, the plan, in any way conflict with the community grid option? That's question number one. I don't know that it does personally, and I should probably know. Secondly, question is, and you may or may not be able to answer this, is there a town plan that supports the community grid or the either of the two options? Is there a town plan that represents that in some kind of form? Thank you very much.
Great question. Perfect question.
So from what I can see about the elevating Erie, it will actually enhance, it will go perfectly well with the community grid, because community grid really is about getting people around in different ways, right? And I'm very excited about elevating Erie. I think it was, and a shout out to Sam Gordon who spearheaded that. Thank you, Sam. So there is, so our town board has come out twice against, with a statement against the community grid, okay? I did not sign it, but everyone else on the town board did. However, our planning board came out with a statement at the beginning of this year stating that they do support taking down the I-81 viaduct. And they actually said a variety of reasons why, which echo the findings of the DOT. So there is conflict in our town, obviously. So.
This guy
I'm
over
going to
here.
defer to my friend.
Well, thank you very much. One of the interesting things which is sort of under the radar, but is extremely important that DOT did, which is, I thought was a very good idea, although some people may not like it, is that the existing 81 is going to be designated as a business loop. So when you approach on 81, you approach Syracuse, you're going to have road signs, and these are going to look just like the 81 road signs, except they're going to say business loop. And so business loop is going to go right down where Almond Street is now. Then it's going to turn on Erie Boulevard, and it's going to split on Oswego and Pearl Street. One is one way and one is the other, and then connect back onto where 81 is. And so anybody approaching from, let's say they're looking for a motel room, and you're coming from the south and you don't know Syracuse well, you're not going to take the 81 bypass. You're going to take the 81 business loop. And these people in the north side people maybe aren't fully aware. I'm sure they're aware of this, but I'm sure they're not making the point, because that's an excellent thing on their part. The other thing too, which from the economic standpoint, if they're making that economic study there, they should make a comparable economic study on what the business effect will be downtown, like our AIA group that Bob heads. As we're estimating that there's a potential for $1.5 billion of development work just along the corridor, right along Almond Street and Erie Boulevard.
Anyone want to comment? I just wanted to say that I live in the town of Salina, and nobody ever asked me. So all those polls, they didn't talk to my husband and I.
I have a comment and a question, and it dovetails with what you just said, Diane. I recall 6 months ago, maybe longer, letters to the editors in the Syracuse newspaper might have been a couple of people about the hotels and how they were remodeling and investing more money in those hotels. And they acknowledged that they did that even with the understanding that the viaduct may come down and they won't have the access. So I find it hypocritical. And I just wonder what happened to that. And it sounds like you recall that letter? Yeah, okay. The second item is Representative Katko, and I went to 3 out of the 4 town halls he had, and I was at the one in the town of Salina. And he kept referring to the Grid Plus option. Unfortunately, it was never unveiled until after all 4 of those meetings happened, which was ridiculous, but he was advocating for that. Now, if everyone recalls what that is, that's the old Chamber of Commerce, the Syracuse Non-Independent Chamber of Commerce. And they were proposing that there should be like a 10-point plan. The plus was to make people more whole that might be damaged by having the grid. So in that timeline I saw, I wish that was in there and accounted for. And where does that stand? It sounded like Katko was hinting at that he'd find dollars to help support those 10 points to help out and address people's concerns in the suburbs. But there's been no talk of that since. So if you have a comment about that, that would be great.
Point well taken. I did include that, and I should have, and I will include it in future presentations. But I think that the Department of Transportation is working towards enhancing 481 and erecting sound barriers. They're looking at the 3 exit and changing that. That's the exit over in Fayetteville to optimize that, because right now it's, it's really not even working now as it is. So I kind of didn't include it because I want to see what the final, it's probably going to be in the final draft. And as you can see, they're working towards, honestly, I don't know how the Department of Transportation is going to study the economic impact that of the hotels in Salina, that they're not really an economic kind of agency that studies economics. So I don't know how that's going to go forward. And I am sure though, when they release their final draft impact study, environmental impact statement, that they will address the enhancement to 481.
Can I ask a quick question to the prior gentleman? When you talked about the amount of development downtown, and I can't remember what number you said, I don't think I need it. We're recording this. Oh, okay. You talked about the amount of development we can expect downtown, and I hear people throw numbers around, and I never hear anybody give specifics about what they expect to happen downtown. For example, are you thinking there will be businesses that will come downtown but aren't there now but for lack of a grid? I would love to know. We have an excess inventory of properties available right now. What businesses do you think will come downtown? And I wanted to point out one other thing. It's kind of interesting. Our downtown has been running downhill for a while, but it's made a remarkable comeback. It's very impressive what's happened downtown. It's very exciting, and it's done it all without the grid. It did it all organically, all by itself without the grid, because people had vision and decided to put money into downtown, and I think that will continue with or without a grid. But I would like to hear some specifics about the businesses that you're talking about that will come downtown if there's a grid.
When the viaduct comes down and it will be the replacement road, highway, whatever you want to call it, 2 lanes each direction, and sidewalks and parking in some places will be narrower than what's presently the right of way. And also on Erie Boulevard, when 690 gets rebuilt and all of that connection where the 690 transitions into 81 South with all of those things there, we figured there would be potentially about 18 acres that would become available. That's going to be in the Meds and Eds area, right there near Upstate and so forth, where they've taken over buildings. In other words, if you think about the Temple Concord, for example, the developer's offering $9 million for that site. How valuable right in that area the land is for development, for things where there isn't presently no land available. And so that's what we're looking at. There's the potential for, and it's owned MX5, which is high-rise buildings. So there's a long-term potential for in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion, so just in that strip alone, not counting any other development that would spread because of the better urban environment that that would create.
So it's potential theoretical. That's what I want.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. Silvia had a great slide up there showing the years that we've been doing with the color dots. I was almost going to put it up because that question's been asked for all of those 6 or 7 years. Here's exactly where we are right now. The DOT, the architects and the planners that have been doing a support as stakeholders in the community have been looking out for the city's future economic growth for its tax base. You have to remember that, in fact, the governor, when he was here 2 days ago, 3 days ago, was so positive in summing up the fact that for 35 years, Syracuse was doing this, down. And now that it's been up, somebody mentioned that the population in downtown residences has gone up 71% in 5 or 6 years now, in terms of residential occupancy in downtown. So there's a huge reverse. But to your question, right now, Rochester is the example to go to. They took down the inner loop, 1/4 of it, and they managed that land and worked it back from the state to get it for the city tax base and then offer it in an organized way to developers for anybody to come in. Now, because of where it is in Rochester, the Strong Museum, and it's put up a parking garage and a hotel for its future growth. And that's all in the land that was previously in the inner loop. So Rochester is the example to look at. However, the fact here is that no matter, the current DOT has no intention, has no indication, I shouldn't say intention, indication of giving any land back to the city at this point today. Yet we've been asking for it. That's one of the unknowns. So that when you hear about who's coming there and that people are going to be removed, there is nothing that the DOT is taking or giving land back that's causing that. All of the housing issues that are going on are being done independently by Housing Authority and Blueprint 15, and they're planning that independent of the DOT because they need to move and they're long overdue in fixing their own properties. So I'm sorry for being so long with it, but there's nothing yet as far as economic development of land returned from the unused land that the community grid offers, because, and the community grid is going to give upwards of 18 acres, probably 6 blocks of high density developable land for the 50-year future of Syracuse. And the 50-year future of Syracuse not only includes anybody who goes in and builds a building, but it includes the employees who are going to drive there, the employees in the area who are going to work there, staffing the building. And it employs also all the architects and planners and contractors who are going to renovate that for 50 years. So that's a very long term. The AIA has a report on the 50-year growth potential of any land in the 18 acres of downtown. We've sent it to the DOT. We have not had anything there to say that we have a program for development in Syracuse similar to Rochester. Hope that helps somewhat.
Got one there and then one here.
Thank you. Hi, I actually have a question, but it may take a minute to get to it. And this affects the suburbs. And you'll see why when I finally get to my question. So I live in the near west side, which is one of those poorer areas, and we have regular gunfire, and my neighbors have been robbed, and we have drug dealers and all that stuff. But we live in the American Institute of Architects 1 and 2 family house of the year for 2012, out of the country, right? LEED platinum, the whole ball of wax. And I recently got an email that said it was valued at $52,000 because of the comps, meaning I live in a poor neighborhood. That said, I'm also very close to the West Street exit from 690, which on any of the planning I've seen is impacted, and West Street is also. So I'm going to focus my question on what happens to those of us who actually live very close to this construction. And we're going to be impacted. And, you know, this reconstruction of 690 took at least a year, as far as I recall. So this whole I-81 is going to take a number of years, which means dust, noise, etc. Okay, so if I wanted to sell my house, now valued at $52,000, you know, I bring in somebody to take a look at this place, and there's construction noise and dust and dirt and whatever, and okay, I may not be able to get my $50,000 out of it. So, with all due respect to the suburbs, and with all the academic discussion of those poor people in the affected areas, my question is, From spade to somebody saying this project is finished, how many years will it take before I have even a chance for my house to be valued at more than 50? I mean, I may be more than 80 years old before I can sell my house. So my question to you, and it impacts the suburbs. What is the total construction time? Because I've never heard it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, and it is a really important question. And it is a question that the DOT has answered. They have the answers. I believe it's like 6 years approximately. So, yeah, it's on their website. So I'm really sorry about your situation, and I am very cognizant that there are going to be some people who are going to be very impacted by the reconstruction of this, by the taking down, whatever happens, they're going to be impacted, okay? Because right now the highway is in very, very bad shape. So it will, they say it will be about 6 years, more or less. You know, that's their estimate. And for us over here, you know, from what we can see in DeWitt, even though the highway, the use of 481 will become 81, and the amount of traffic will increase, we still won't be nearly as impacted as you are, okay? But we do see the benefits, and there will be people impacted. There will be change. You can't say there won't be change. There will be change for businesses, there will be change for residents, and it'll be a transition that you're going through. I don't have answers for you in terms of what the best course of action in terms of your particular house. I do know that in Syracuse, they are thinking a lot about the schools along that viaduct area and the sounds and the dust and all of that and the impacts it will have. It doesn't change the question of how to, you know, about proceeding. But it is really important for you to make your voice heard to the DOT. You tell them exactly what your concerns are. You ask them if there's any kind of mitigation you can get. You ask them for you know, some sort of help in your situation. And you talk to your neighbors too, okay? There's power in numbers. But at the moment, if the DOT does not hear from you, they don't know. I mean, and that's the bottom line we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to talk to the DOT, and the DOT is dying for people to talk to them. That's kind of a problem we have right now. But as I said, I'm sorry about your particular situation and how it will be impacted. I wish it weren't that way. They do say it'll be about 6 years, but I really encourage you to make your voice heard at the DOT.
I was just going to say, if I'm not mistaken, Bob, I think the community grid is the shortest length of all the alternatives they suggested. Rebuilding I-81, the tunnel, which is not on the table anymore. The community grid was the easiest one to finish for the shorter amount of time. Least costly.
Can I weigh in on that? I want to ask one thing. John,
Wait, I have someone else wanted to.
No, I hope not to disrupt that previous conversation. I did want to raise about what I think is a neglected question, which is public transportation in all this. I'm sure you might realize that Central has been on a, say, 40, 50-year decline since at least 1950. But however, the good news is, as is congruent with a resurgence of interest in the city and young people moving back to the city, which is similar to many cities in the United States. We've seen increases, small increases since about 2000s, the mid 2000s. And so just as another part of that, while John Katko was holding his meetings about, challenging the current decisions making in I-81. Rochester's Reimagine RTS, which is their transit system, Rochester's transit system was doing a 2-year public comment period on how does the public want Rochester's transit to change. And so they have just about concluded that, and they are and so at the time CATCA was doing those meetings, they were asking the suburban population of Rochester, what kind of access would you like? So just wondering how your group has, if you have heard any interest in public transportation, under what conditions, park and ride, any other, or would like to contribute ideas?
Great question. I am a big advocate of public transportation, and in this region, it's always been a little bit tricky because you have to have a certain density of population to be able to pay for public transportation. My personal feelings is that we have got to bite the bullet and do some investment in transportation, and I'll tell you why. One of the reasons, the county, even though the city has gained some population in the center, and that's fantastic. And I will have to mention that not all of the city is doing well. I mean, I agree with you about that, the resurgence, and there's been some fantastic development, and I'm really happy with it. But there are way too many parts of the city that are not doing well. But back to the population of the county, we've been losing population in the last 20 years, okay? It's slowly declining. The way we're gonna get them back is we're gonna have to be ready for the 21st century here. And part of that is being able to get people around. One of the biggest ways of combating poverty is allowing people a way to get to their job. We can have all the job training out the wazoo, but if they can't get there, then it's a failure, okay? So at the end of the day, I am a big advocate of public transportation. I think we should focus a whole lot more than we do on it. And it's not just out in the suburbs. There's lots of different ways we can do it. We have to be thinking about the future when we look at transportation. We have to, and we have to fight. We need leaders to fight to get it, okay? We need money, right, to do that. It's hard to say, well, we can't do it because we don't have population. Well, we're not going to get the population if we do not get the infrastructure in there to support it and to make people want to be here. Because public transportation for the future is what really a lot of people want to go and live near. So I'm off my soapbox now.
Thank you. I do have a question. I agree completely that people getting to work is critical. I mean, jobs are critical, arguably the most important thing we should be working on right now. So with the potential warehouse north of the city, and I work with a nonprofit whose clients are all south of the city, none of them will benefit from anything having to do with the Syracuse surge. They're a population that just won't, but they would benefit from the warehouse operation, assuming that happens. Why wouldn't we want a viaduct that gets them there really fast instead of going through whatever it is, the 13 traffic lights and slower traffic? That's that 20-minute city thing is a real thing. And it particularly points south of downtown and southwest of downtown, those folks would benefit, anybody would benefit, and it's, getting to jobs or maybe getting to a second job.
Well, some people may benefit from the viaduct. Overall, the health impacts of a viaduct are negative, right? That we know that systemic racism has constructed those passageways in a place that increases asthma intensely for poor populations of color, okay? So you put the viaduct in, you're just reiterating that. So it may help some people, but it's not going to help those babies who are going to the hospital at night because they can't breathe.
I think this is a really important question, and I think at the end of the day, we have choices we have to make, right? So we have to weigh what is more important. Now, in my town, we have, I think, 70% of the industrial land of the whole county in the town of DeWitt. So we have lots of jobs there. But we had a zoning situation that would make it pretty impossible if you did not have a car. You could not work there, okay? And that is a vestige of a racist policy of the past, okay? It was done intentionally, okay? It is actually documented. So we did actually change our zoning. Now, we changed our zoning to allow mixed use, which means that people could possibly live near where they work, okay? But most of the towns haven't done that, okay? Now, with the warehouse, so there's an evolution of moving people and the way infrastructure goes. When you put down a warehouse, if your zoning is reasonable, you will be in a situation where people can move and live nearby where they're going to work, okay? Or they'll be on a bus route or something like that. So things evolve. The question is getting some people to work a little faster worth the negative impacts that it has created and perpetuating it? So, I mean, we all have to decide that. There are pros and cons to this. When I look at the whole picture, and as I said, I've lived in lots of places, it's not a big deal to have a grid. It really isn't. You just get used to it. And it really isn't, people move. They have to move, have to change where they are. But that's the evolution of all infrastructure change. It's a great question, and it's involve change. So.
And I think that's right. We have to make choices. It's not zero sum, but we also do have to decide on our priorities. And for me, I think for me, the priority is not getting people to jobs. For me, the priority is climate change, because I know that I see it as a critically urgent question. I tell my 20-year-old daughter regularly, and I do not think she should have children, because we do not have the economic means for, we're not wealthy, we're not upper middle class wealthy enough to make sure that those children's well-being is going to be insured in 50 years. I mean, I'm really concerned about climate change, and I think anything that reiterates the structure of the automobile is contributing to that. There was just a whole article in the New Yorker, I suggest people look it up, about, was it a mistake? Was this era of the cars a mistake? Just out yesterday or the day before. So that's my priority. That's me, right? But I'm going to advocate for what I believe in, and
I thank you everyone for coming. We are at the 1:30 moment. John, did you want to say any final words?
I just want to say thanks. It was a great conversation, an important one.
Thank you. Thank you to our presenters for taking the time. Yes, don't forget to stop recording it. Hang on.